Okay, so the core teaching of NAR is that apostles and prophets are supposed to govern the church. They're supposed to hold the highest offices in the church, and all others, including pastors, elders, everyone else is supposed to submit to them. And so it's this belief that there are these governing offices, these hierarchical offices in church government. And the reason they would say that you need those offices is because they're the only two, apostles and prophets are the only two offices that are authorized by God to bring new revelation that the church needs. This is critical revelation that the church needs to bring God's kingdom to earth. And so for all believers to learn to develop miraculous powers. And so like this great end time army can rise up, and with these miraculous powers and waging spiritual warfare, they can bring God's kingdom to earth. But these NAR teachings are basically rehashed doctrines from the latter rain movement of the post World War II era, so the late 1940s, 1950s. There was this movement that basically taught all of these same things, but it grew quickly, but then fizzled out quickly, because the Assemblies of God, the largest Pentecostal denomination in the world, condemned the teachings of this movement. And so it quickly fizzled out and kind of went underground. But authoritative prophets and apostles started coming back up into churches, like independent charismatic churches, in the 1980s and 1990s. Mm-hmm. They started rising up. And C. Peter Wagner was a church growth professor who has passed away, but he was very influential, a leading voice in the church growth movement, like in the 1980s, 1990s. And he was at Fuller Seminary for about 30 years. So he had a long tenure there. And during that time, he said he started noticing the features of what were the fastest growing churches in the world. And one feature he noticed about these churches was that they were led by apostles. And so he ended up writing about 6 books on apostles. And he wrote a book that was very influential called Churchquake, How the New Apostolic Reformation is Shaking Up the Church as We Know It, something like that. And being at Fuller, he started introducing this idea of apostles leading the church to kind of the larger academic world, started popularizing these NAR teachings, and he actually came up with the label New Apostolic Reformation.
Okay.
And he said it was new because it was a new movement, but it's apostolic because of the central role of apostles in governing the church. And it's a reformation because its effects would be as big as or even greater than the Protestant Reformation. And so he kind of started systematizing the teachings that he saw these churches promoting. And he also worked very closely with a man named Bill Heyman, who's a very influential prophet in this movement. And Bill Heyman actually was a young man during the Latter Rain movement. And so Bill Heyman brought in a lot of the Latter Rain teachings and into the New Apostolic Reformation. And C. Peter Wagner was systematizing these teachings in the books. And Wagner worked very closely with a lot of people who became leading apostles and prophets in this movement, like Chuck Pierce or Cindy Jacobs, Cheon, who's still a very influential apostle today. He's over a network of tens of thousands of churches that look to him as their apostle globally. And so a number of leaders worked with Peter Wagner closely. He started the Wagner Leadership Institute, which was basically a seminary, kind of like a seminary to train up leaders for this movement. But it's not like a seminary where people would go to, study Greek and Hebrew and it was to go to learn to become apostles and prophets and wage spiritual warfare and learn how to work miracles and that kind of thing. So an unaccredited school. But anyways, so a lot of those people who were connected with Wagner are still around promoting these teachings. But there's a lot of people who didn't have a direct relationship with Wagner, but they're still promoting all of these core teachings that he wrote about in his books about apostles and prophets and their role in bringing the kingdom to earth through critical new revelation. And so people like Bill Johnson at Bethel Church in Redding, California, the home to Bethel Music, which a lot of your viewers will know about. He's a leader in this movement. Jesus Culture came out of Bethel Church in Redding. You still have Cheon, like I mentioned, at Harvest Rock Church in Pasadena. You have Randy Clark is a leading apostle in this movement in Pennsylvania. Thinking of other ones, Heidi Baker would be a leader in this movement. Are there other names, Doug, that you can think of that?
I don't know if you mentioned Rick Joyner. He would be.
No, Rick Joyner. Yeah, Rick Joyner is another big one.
Now, one name that's
Louis
been in the
Gold.
news recently has been Mike Bickle at the I think
Yes.
it's the International House of Prayer is the name
Yep.
of the church.
Yeah,
IHOP. Yeah.
very influential organization. So really, Bethel Church in Redding is the most popular and well-known church today in this movement. But next to that, the International House of Prayer in Kansas City was very high up, and of course, that people who have been following what's happened there, it's IHOP
Yes.
has
Right.
basically been imploding because of the scandals that have arisen there in relation to Mike Bickle, who many viewed as a prophet in this movement, even though he would deny that he was a prophet. Many viewed him that way, and that's become apparent in the aftermath of what's been happening there.
Another relatively high-profile figure because of his global reach, especially in Africa, would be Daniel Kolenda. He's also in the NAR camp.